Good day, and welcome to the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, the Use and Impact of Federal Nutrition Programs at Farmers Market webinar. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Patrick Hyman. Please go ahead, sir.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks everyone for attending today. This webinar will explore the expanding role and impact of federal nutrition program use at local farmers markets, as well as efforts to increase participation of low-income families in these markets, as well as the benefits and challenges for farmers market vendors in accepting public assistance benefits. Now, before I introduce today's speakers, I wanted to talk just really briefly about the SSRC, that's the Self-Sufficiency Research Clearinghouse, and kind of how the topic of food assistance fits into its research framework. Slide. Ta-da. So the SSRC is kind of what we call a virtual portal of research and resources related to self-sufficiency. And the SSRC also functions as an online community for professional networking for those focused on self-sufficiency, employment, and family and child well-being. Slide, there we go. Now, the purpose of the SSRC is to disseminate quality research, and I think we currently have over 2,700 items in our library, and we're kind of constantly adding new publications. The SSRC is designed, again, for kind of researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and includes several interactive features in addition to the library. Now, the library, as you can kind of see on your screen, the browse topics, is made up of 12 topical areas, kind of listed on the right with food assistance highlighted in orange. All items that go into the library are reviewed for relevancy to the field of self-sufficiency and to low-income populations. And kind of the new browse topic feature enables users of the SSRC to view research by topic, as well as kind of those resources that have been highlighted and recommended by the SSRC library team. The events calendar, which is also part of the SSRC, includes information on in-person and virtual events relevant to the field of self-sufficiency, kind of like today's webinar. The SSRC also includes multiple high-quality data to users to support program improvement and facilitate self-sufficiency outcomes for children, families, and communities. And lastly, I think one of the more interesting parts of the SSRC and kind of one of the driving motivators behind the SSRC is the Stay Connected tab, which you see at the top there, which includes tools and information to help members kind of interact, form, and expand professional networks, and to identify opportunities for collaboration. The tab contains a directory of organizations and stakeholders in the field that can be kind of browsed and filtered by audience type and topical area. Now, organizations can register themselves with the SSRC and will be sent kind of an SSRC logo they can feature on their website. And this is not necessarily an endorsement of the SSRC, but it's rather kind of a way to promote professional connections and conversations. Okay, so that's the SSRC. So today's webinar, we've got 4 fantastic speakers. I'll just kind of introduce them really briefly, and then we'll kick into the actual presentations. Rogelio Carrasco, Program Analyst at FNS. He will give us an overview of farmers markets and their connection to low-income individuals and families, kind of particularly within the context of public assistance benefits like WIC and SNAP. Dr. Sujata Dixit-Joshi from Westat will discuss findings from their recent FNS-funded farmers market operation study. And as this study investigated operation considerations for vendors electing to accept SNAP benefits at farmers markets, looked at awareness of and participation in USDA nutrition assistance programs among vendors at farmers markets, methods farmers markets have used to inform vendors of SNAP participation, as well as kind of some of the perceived benefits and barriers of accepting SNAP at farmers markets. Kelly Verel from Project for Public Spaces will discuss findings from their recent study that they did in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, to investigate farmers markets and some of the real and perceived barriers of their use by low-income communities. And last but not least, Kate Cole, MPH from the University of Washington, will discuss some of her previous research on operational considerations, client outreach, vendor reaction, and client participation issues associated with using the, and I'll just kind of read out the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, also known as WIC, using those benefits at farmers markets. So again, 4 very exciting presenters. And just really quickly, all Q&A will be kind of handled at the end of the webinar after all 4 speakers have gone. Participants can submit questions during the webinar, though, via the question and answer feature at the bottom right side of your screen, kind of as a Q&A heading at the top. And so questions like throughout the webinar will be collected and then, again, kind of answered at the end of the presentation. If we do run out of time, all questions will be answered and responses will be posted on the SSRC along with other webinar materials after the event. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rogelio. Rogelio?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Patrick. Again, this is Rogelio Carrasco. I'm with the Food Nutrition Service. I'm the SNAP Farmers Market Coordinator there. And I guess really where we need to start is we need to provide, or I need to provide some general context so that you guys know where the department is coming from relative to farmers markets and our nutrition assistance programs. And I think the very first and possibly most important thing that I'm going to say is that the department is very, very supportive of having farmers markets participate in our nutritional assistance programs, specifically the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, which a lot of people still refer to as food stamps, but we don't, it's SNAP, and what is typically referred to as the Women, Infants, and Children Program. Both of those programs can be used at farmers markets, but I can tell you that it's not as simple as just saying we're going to accept those benefits. If a market wants to redeem those benefits, it has to go through an application process for each of those programs, and there are 2 separate and distinct application processes. And in fact, the process of redeeming those benefits would be different for each of those programs. SNAP has been EBT, that's electronic benefits transfer. You're basically your little card that looks like a debit or credit card that you swipe on a machine. SNAP has been using those for a number of years, and WIC is transitioning to that, but up until now, I believe it's still using vouchers. Don't take anything I say about WIC too definitively. I'm on the SNAP side of the house. I can speak to WIC a little bit, but that's not my forte. Speaking of SNAP, I should point out that we have placed, and we, the Food Nutrition Service, have placed a heavy emphasis on bringing farmers markets into the program. And the way that's happened is, and again, now I'm providing a little more detail in terms of the context. In fiscal year 12, Congress appropriated to FNS $4 million for the purpose of providing wireless EBT equipment to farmers markets. Well, why wireless as opposed to the traditional EBT machines that you find at a supermarket or a convenience store? Well, that's because farmers markets are, as you all well know, typically not going to be operating every day of the week. They're not going to be operating on what people will refer to as typical business hours. They're regular, but they are once a week, once every 2 weeks. So you can't have a machine there all the time. And of course, a lot of these events take place in rural areas or out of doors where there isn't a landline available. So we've placed a heavy emphasis on providing wireless equipment to these farmers markets. Now, as I said, funds were provided to the states in fiscal year 12, and we provided those funds to the states based on a formula that took into account the number of farmers markets not participating in the program at that time. So, for example, if you were Texas and you had 3% of the markets that were not participating in SNAP, you received 3% of the funds. That met some limited success, but we did find out towards the end of fiscal year 13 that the funds were not being used as quickly as we'd hoped. there was a significant amount of funds remaining with the states. And we had another pot of $4 million that we needed to allocate for the same purpose. I should say that the language governing the use of those funds was very specific. The funds could only be used for the acquisition of equipment and related services, so like your wireless plan that would come with a piece of equipment. We realized that what we were doing was not working as well as we'd hoped, so we then decided that we were going to go down another path, which is where we are now. We put out a request for proposals, asking members of the farmers market community to come to us and tell us how they would, if awarded a contract, make sure that we got as many markets into the program as possible. The winner of that contract was an organization called the National Association of Farmers Market Nutrition Programs. This is an organization that's been around for over 20 years and has extensive experience and relationships in the farmers market community. And what they did is, well, they're doing several things to help us expend these funds. Most notably, one of the things they've done is they've created a website called marketlink.org, and this is where I am just flat out plugging. I am asking you all to write down marketlink.org, and that's an online portal that provides a streamlined way to assist markets and farmers markets become SNAP authorized and to obtain the SNAP EBT equipment that they need to process SNAP transactions. The website is really great. We've gotten a lot of great reviews on it. If you go, whether you're a farmer's market or you're an individual farmer, you can take a very short eligibility assessment to determine whether you're eligible for free equipment. If you're not eligible for free equipment, there's going to be some purchase and rental options for you. You can still become SNAP authorized, but you might have to buy the equipment. But if you are eligible for free equipment. And let me repeat that, that's free. You would get an iPhone, you would get basically like a case that goes over the iPhone so that you can process the transaction, so you can swipe the cards. You would get a wireless printer. You would get the software. You would get software licensing. You would get a processing agreement with WorldPay. You will get a data plan. Basically everything you need to go from having somebody walk up with their EBT card, swiping it, and getting them out to continue their shopping experience at the market. Typically, that's going to be a $2,000 value, and if you're a market or you're a direct marketing farmer, you're going to get that for free. And I say that knowing perfectly well that this is being recorded and that somebody may listen to this, and so again, I'm going to plug it, marketlink.org. I should also point out that the association is also using its network of local on-the-ground representatives that it has established over its 21-year history of working with the farmers market community to promote this opportunity at conferences, seminars, trade shows, webinars, conference calls, etc., and has also created and distributed training and promotional materials at blogs, articles, and relevant media and trade publications. In terms of the training promotional materials, if you have an event that's large enough, we can actually send out a representative in many cases to show up and try to help people, guide them through the process of getting signed up. Again, I should go back to MarketLink and point out that once you find out whether you're eligible, you actually will get technical assistance setting up an EOF account with USDA, which is necessary for anybody that deals with our computer systems. You'll get technical assistance filling out the application. You will get technical assistance setting up your processing agreement, and when the machine comes, making sure that you're set up and ready to go. Well, that's my plug. I'll say it one more time, marketlink.org, marketlink.org. I encourage anybody who's listening to this to knows anybody who would like to participate to please go to that website. Well, how has this effort worked? I mean, has it been successful? Well, I can tell you that there are approximately 8,000 farmers markets in the country. Currently, approximately 2,400 of those, pardon me, 2,500. It's 2,550 are SNAP authorized themselves, the actual markets. That is a 3.79% increase over the end of fiscal year 13. So we are improving steadily. We're starting to grow at an accelerated rate as we go through this process. I can tell you that at the end of fiscal year 13, approximately $16 million, $16.3 million in SNAP benefits were used at farmers markets. That's a respectable number, but when you take into account how large SNAP is and how many markets there are throughout the country, there is tremendous room for growth. And the reason that the department is so supportive of farmers markets is that we believe it's a win-win situation for everybody involved. SNAP recipients obviously are receiving fresh and locally grown foods that are healthier. Farmers are receiving access to a greater customer base without any middleman, and hopefully providing better prices, but getting better prices than they might have gotten from a warehouser or a supermarket. And the markets themselves become more viable, so it helps local communities become, and here's where we dovetail with the notion of self-sufficiency, it helps make those markets more viable. And so again, I don't like to use buzzwords, but you create a synergy there between participants, vendors, markets, and communities. Anyway, I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there. I said that at the end of fiscal year 13, there was $16.3 million that were spent at farmers markets. Currently, approximately $4 million have been spent at this point in fiscal year 14, but I should point out that the farmers market season is barely getting started. Maybe a little bit more advanced in the southern parts of the country, but in the northern parts of the country, we're barely getting started. And so even though we're only at $4 million this year, that is 12.68% higher than at the same time in fiscal year 13. I should also point out that we have approximately 1,600 direct marketing farmers, that's actual individual farmers, who are authorized to participate in SNAP. Pardon me, that was at the end of fiscal year 13. We are now at 1,704. That's a 6.5% increase since the end of the fiscal year. And what's important about those folks is that a lot of times the market itself will not be authorized to participate in SNAP, but you will have 1 or 2 or 3 vendors at a market who are authorized to participate in SNAP. So even though the market itself does not provide SNAP, vendors can provide that service. And I think I've taken up quite a bit of time. I think I'm going to stop there and pass it on to the next speaker. I think I've covered everything I need to cover.
Okay, thank you, Rogelio. Our next speaker is Dr. Sujata Dixit-Joshi from Westat. Sujata?
Thank you, Patrick. So that was a really good orientation and introduction to Rogelio. This study that I'm presenting is also funded by the USDA, and a lot of what is said is really presenting information after the study was conducted. This presentation is going to focus on understanding the current operations from the perspective of how SNAP works at farmers markets and how direct marketing farmers are using SNAP to sell their own products. It was conducted through a national survey of farmers market managers and direct marketing farmers. So to get started, this particular study was conducted with 5 specific research questions, and they are a lot broader than what this paper or this slide is showing you. Essentially, the basic questions were to understand what are the characteristics of farmers markets and direct marketing farmers that participate in SNAP or don't participate in SNAP, or that have SNAP authorization but don't redeem any benefits. So it's just understanding what are the similarities and differences across markets and farmers based on their SNAP authorization and redemption status. It was also to understand what are the procedures that are being used by markets and by farmers to redeem the SNAP benefits. Are these similar, or do they vary by markets and farmers? The third research question was to understand some of the reasons for markets as well as farmers to discontinue their SNAP participation. And then the fourth one was to understand if there are any incentive programs that are being offered at the market. So it was to understand the prevalence as well as the types of incentives that are offered. There was a subsequent study that was led by Melissa King at Westat that actually did some more in-depth interviews with incentive providers to understand their role in providing the incentives and supporting the market. I will not be discussing that. And finally, the last research question was to understand what other organizations are serving farmers markets and direct marketing farmers, and exactly what services are these organizations providing. Obvious it is to say that in the 15-20 minutes that I have, I'm not going to be able to answer all of these research questions in the presentation, but the report itself provides a lot of great information, and there is a link to it at the end of this presentation. Getting into understanding the population of interest, as I said, we were trying to examine the similarities and differences or the characteristics of farmers markets and farmers based on their SNAP redemption and authorization status. So we sampled for 4 specific groups to be included in this study. The first item included those markets and farmers that had SNAP authorization and also had redeemed SNAP benefits in the past year. The second group was those markets and farmers that were SNAP authorized but had not redeemed any benefits in the past year. The third group, or item 3, was markets and farmers that were SNAP authorized sometime within the past year, but for various reasons had discontinued SNAP authorization, and therefore they were not SNAP authorized and did not redeem benefits. And finally, the fourth group was farmers markets. This does not include direct marketing farmers, just farmers markets that were never SNAP authorized. And we did not have direct marketing farmers in Stratum 4 because we did not have a good sampling frame for direct marketing farmers that were not SNAP authorized. So what we did is that we did have a phase 1 to this national survey, which was to do some more in-depth case studies with 9 different markets. And based on our case studies, we actually developed a survey instrument. We discussed the instrument with the experts, and then we realized that we needed 2 separate instruments, one for the market and one for direct marketing farmers. A majority of the questions in these 2 surveys were similar, but there were some unique items that were put in there just to get the perspective of markets and farmers separately. We did do cognitive testing on these instruments, and then we revised the questions based on the feedback that we received from the participants in the cog testing, which were primarily market managers and farmers themselves. The study was fielded between January and May of 2012, and what we got back was about 49% of the surveys completed by mail, which was the most predominant mode of completion. The survey was available online, and 32% did so online. For those who did not respond either by mail or web, we collected data by telephone, which was for 19% of the farmers and market managers. We had a very high response rate. Overall, we had about 4,000 participants, managers as well as farmers in this study, and this is not surprising that the people who responded at a higher rate to our survey were those that had SNAP authorization and actually had redeemed benefits in the past year, and our lowest response rate was about 52% for markets that were never SNAP authorized. Despite this number, we think this is a very high response rate, 52%, and this actually represents over 1,200 or about 1,200 farmers markets. So we have a substantial N here to get some really good insights from these people about why they don't participate. So I'm going to go into the results, and I'm pulling out a few relevant slides. So it may seem that I'm providing a broader picture, but if you have any questions, we can discuss those later. Taking a look at who responded to these surveys, the farmers market surveys were completed by market managers, and these individuals were responsible for handling the financial, administrative, and outreach work specific to the market that we had sampled. These individuals had worked at the market for about 5 years or less. In contrast, the direct marketing farmers were individuals who were working full-time at the farm. They also attended the market and managed volunteers as well as employees both at the farm and at the market. And their tenure in farming varied quite a lot. with about some individuals reporting that they had just started this about 3 months ago to some that were reporting over 20 years of farm experience. So we do know that the farmers markets as well as farmers that are participating in SNAP are already aware that they can take part in SNAP. This particular slide is showing the awareness level among those that were previously authorized but not in the past year, or those markets that were never SNAP authorized. And as we can see, this is showing a very high level of awareness that, in fact, both markets and farmers can actually get authorization to participate in SNAP. And I think this is really good news, which tells us that there is knowledge. We need to try and figure out why they are not participating. So this is a slide that talks about direct marketing farmers in SNAP, and this is broken down by the stratum. We discussed this before. This is based on authorization and redemption status. And as we can see here, SNAP is accepted by farmers at fewer all outlets. It's not surprising to see that about 97% of those that are SNAP authorized and have redemptions are saying that they do so at all outlets. What's a little surprising here is that in Stratum 3, which is the SNAP authorized farmers that have not had redemptions or that have discontinued participation, are also saying that they accept SNAP at a few or all outlets. And this is going back to the point that Rogelio was making, that this is demonstrating a situation where the vendors themselves are not authorized, but they are selling products at SNAP authorized farmers markets, and so they are using the authorization from the market level. This is borne down further in row 4, which says outlet was SNAP authorized. So this is saying that at outlet where the farmer redeemed the most SNAP benefits, 93% of those in Stratum 3 are saying that they sold products at SNAP authorized markets. And this might actually be a theme that I'd like to stress throughout to indicate that even though farmers are not authorized, they might be selling products at SNAP authorized markets, and the converse is true where the market is not authorized, but the vendors may be suggesting a greater reach of SNAP because of the mutually dependent relationship between markets and vendors with SNAP authorization. So this is taking a look at the methods that are used by farmers markets and direct marketing farmers to redeem SNAP benefits. And this is just taking a look at the Stratum 1 markets because they are the ones who had been authorized and had redemptions in the past year. And what's interesting here is that when you take a look at the direct marketing farmers, all of them, 95% of them are using an EDT machine to redeem SNAP benefits. Tokens, offline vouchers, and paper scripts are used to a much smaller extent than farmers markets use. And this suggests that they may actually be using market authorization in some instances. For farmers markets, you're seeing about 77% using EDT machines and an equally high number using tokens. The paper script use was higher among farmers markets than among direct marketing farmers. Again, this is not surprising because if a market has authorization, they spread the SNAP acceptance to multiple vendors at the market, whereas if a farmer is authorized, they themselves can handle the transaction, reducing the need to use paper scripts and increasing the reliance on EBT machines. So what are some of the benefits that were reported by farmers market managers and direct marketing farmers? We did see that all of the 4 strata for farmers markets and 3 for the direct marketing farmers indicated that there were lots of benefits from accepting SNAP. Consistently, for both of these categories of respondents, increasing sales for producers was the #1 reason, followed by increases in the types of customers that they were able to serve because they accepted SNAP. Promoting healthy access to healthy foods in the community was also reported by both of these respondent categories. Responding to customer interest and improving the market's public image was reported by farmers market managers. Taking a look at some of the factors that were reported that made it challenging to accept SNAP, the factors that were reported for the most part were similar across the market manager respondents and the farmer respondents. But there were a few significant differences in what came out on the very top. For example, in a market setting, the staffing need to operate the EBT was the #1 barrier reported by managers. And for direct marketing farmers, the #1 reason was not having enough customers to make SNAP transactions. Additional bookkeeping and back office costs were constant across both of these groups, as were the ongoing transaction fees associated with EBT or the startup costs or the requirements to become SNAP authorized. And I'm glad to know about the market link because this would definitely simplify the whole process on getting SNAP authorization and increase these and address these barriers of getting SNAP authorization. So here is a look at the reasons why markets that were previously authorized do not participate any longer, or the reasons why some of the markets choose never to participate. When asked, farmers markets indicated that the reason for non-participation or discontinuation in the past 5 years was because they did not have enough vendor interest to go ahead and get the SNAP authorization. They also indicated they had a lack of infrastructure or equipment required, and they were concerned about the startup and ongoing costs. The lack of vendor interest was actually also reflected by the vendors or the farmers themselves, where they said that besides the startup and ongoing costs, they did not really have any interest in taking part in SNAP. And this may be driven by the third reason, which is they did not think they had enough of a customer base, which might explain the no interest part. But the reports were consistent across farmers as well as managers about their reasons for non-participation. We specifically asked them to tell us the reasons for not participating in the last year. And again, the reasons for both of these respondent categories were pretty similar, where they were concerned about not having enough participants or the startup and ongoing costs, as well as the lack of infrastructure and equipment. For the Stratum 2 markets that were SNAP authorized but did not have any redemptions, we wondered why they had not redeemed any SNAP benefits thus far. It's likely that these markets may have been SNAP authorized in a very recent time frame and therefore did not have enough time between authorization and the need to redeem. Or it may also be a seasonal effect where these markets may have received authorization in an off farmers market season and maybe waiting for the next year's farmers market to start up. These reasons were not reported, and we did not actually examine them carefully. But what was reported, again, was that they did not have enough participants or that they lacked the infrastructure or equipment. And I think that it was the way the question was worded that we couldn't tease out if it was the infrastructure or the equipment, because these markets and farmers have gone through the process of getting authorization. So it's possible they might just be waiting on the equipment. Complicated process to set up the EBT was reported by both markets and farmers. And then in a few instances, the farmers market respondents indicated that the board or the organization that's supporting them did not approve of SNAP acceptance at the market. These findings were presented for Stratum 2, but we had similar responses for both market managers and farmers in the other 3 categories. I'm going through this fairly quickly, and I want to talk about the incentives for SNAP customers. So what's interesting here is that the top portion of the table is providing the data for farmers market, and the bottom is providing the data for the direct marketing farmers. What we can see here is that for Stratum 1, which is the SNAP authorized farmers markets with redemption, about 50% of them are offering some incentives. 54% are not offering any incentives. And the rate of incentive offering is lower as you move away from SNAP authorization and redemption. So 92% of the never SNAP authorized markets are saying that they don't offer incentives. And this is a bit perplexing because you wouldn't expect never authorized SNAP markets to offer financial incentives to SNAP participants. But it's possible that these individuals who are reporting to the survey may be considering the vendors as their markets that may have SNAP authorization and offer some type of an incentive to the SNAP customer. For the most part, the incentives that were offered pertain to financial incentives, which are potentially supported by Wholesome Wave or other national organizations, but in our report, it turned out that most of the support that was provided for financial incentives came from local organizations, such as the city government, some of them did state government, and then local foundations and nonprofits. So 31% of those in Stratum 1 indicated that they offer financial incentives to their participants. 4% reported that they offer non-financial incentives. And these incentives were looking at things like, did they offer any cooking demonstrations or taste testing or things like that. And that's what was reported as non-financial. About 12% of the markets indicated that they did offer financial incentives as well as non-financial incentives in Stratum 1. And then there were lower percentages for Stratum 2, 3, and 4 markets. When we take a look at the outlets where direct marketing farmers were redeeming SNAP benefits, we can see an interesting picture emerging. And so for Stratum 1 direct marketing farmers, about 13% of them indicated that the financial incentives were offered by the outlet where they were selling their products. In contrast, about 31% of those in Stratum 3 indicated that financial incentives were offered at the outlet where they were selling their products. And this is clearly demonstrating that it's likely one of the reasons why Stratum 3 markets are no longer participating is because they are probably selling more and more at markets that are SNAP authorized. Taking a look then, financial incentives offered by vendors, we can see that in terms of this is a much lower percentage than that offered by an outlet because the vendors obviously have limited resources, financial resources to offer incentives. But they do offer non-financial incentives to these individuals who are redeeming SNAP with them. So I'd like to conclude now with a few high points. The first one is that overall, we saw really high level of SNAP awareness among farmers market managers as well as direct marketing farmers that had previous authorizations or market managers that were never authorized to accept SNAP at their market. The second point is that SNAP reach is much greater than either the number of authorized farmers markets or the number of authorized direct marketing farmers alone. And in a sense, this is showing the relationship that farmers have with markets in terms of reliance on SNAP authorization status. And what it's essentially saying is that if the farmers markets are not authorized, that does not indicate that the market does not accept SNAP because they may host vendors that accept SNAP. And the converse is true where direct marketing farmers may not have SNAP authorization, but the market does. So in fact, the SNAP programs are accepted at more farmers markets than the number of authorized farmers markets. The third important point that came out of here is that almost all of the farmers markets and direct marketing farmers perceive that there are benefits to participating in SNAP, and they also reported that there are barriers. The frequently cited barriers pertain to the lack of infrastructure or equipment, as well as the cost and staffing to manage this EBP system. The difficulty in the application process, as well as a few individuals cited the need to provide personal information as barriers to accepting SNAP or participating in SNAP. And finally, incentives were not offered by most of the direct marketing farmers, but offered by 50% of the markets. And the organizations that support these incentive programs tend to be local, primarily municipal, city government, as well as nonprofits and other organizations. This is extracted from a report that was published, and it can be obtained from the FNS website. That's all I have. Back to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Sujata. Just a quick message, those submitting questions. Thank you for submitting questions so far. We're tracking them, and we'll get those to the end. That's one thing we weren't ignoring your questions. Our next speaker is Kelly Verel from Project for Public Spaces. Kelly?
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you to everybody for inviting me and for being here today. PPS is really grateful for participating in this webinar today. Let's see if I have access here to move us along. Oh. Patrick, are we?
I'm sorry, you have to keep the
That's okay. Okay, here we go. No problem. Okay, so I'm just moving along to the next slide. The topic that I'm going to discuss today is a study that we recently published about a year ago, actually, called Farmers Markets as a Strategy to Improve Access to Healthy Food for Low-Income Families and Communities. Just a little bit of background. Project for Public Spaces, where I work, PPS, we're founded in 1975. We're located in New York, but we work internationally on a variety of different kinds of public spaces. Specifically for today, I work in the Public Markets Program, which was founded in 1987. And since then, we've been working with a variety of indoor, outdoor, year-round, seasonal, fresh food and non-food markets across the U.S. and Canada for the most part. But within the last 10 years or so, we've really turned a lot of our attention to farmers markets, not probably coincidentally that at the same time that we've sort of paid more attention to them, as has sort of the whole United States. And with that kind of turn of attention to farmers markets, we've also pretty quickly started paying attention to how farmers markets can benefit and interact in lower income communities, or at least in communities that have a diverse economic customer base, and to see what's working and what's not working. So we, several years ago, partnered up with Columbia University and approached the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation through their Healthy Eating Research Grant Program for funding to do this study, which, as far as we know, is the first of this type of study to look at farmers markets. It certainly was the first of this type for Robert Wood Johnson to fund. And just to give a little bit, to be honest, and a background, the work was actually conducted 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, in 2009. It took a while working with Columbia to kind of dig through it and tabulate and figure out what it is that we were really going to be able to publicly show from the study, and the study was published in February, I think, of 2013. So some of it, the data might be slightly old, although we think that a lot of the information is true today. So moving on to the motivation for the study. In 2002, we started a program with the Ford Foundation, and then that quickly expanded to a partnership with the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, in which we first started looking at the impact of farmers markets across the country. From there, that grew into a re-granting process where we were given funding through the two foundations, which we then re-granted out to over 20 farmers markets across the United States and Canada. It's with that interaction that we had, which included technical assistance and one-on-one providing of public space support and support in setting up SNAP, EBT programs, et cetera, that we really started to pay close attention to how farmers markets interact, as I said, with low-income consumers. As Rogelio mentioned at the very beginning, this has been a growing movement, farmers markets in the U.S. They've grown over 150% in the last 10 years. So they really have the potential to have a great impact on our country's food access issues. And so we wanted to take a look, using this funding from RWJF, at how farmers markets have the potential to improve healthy food access in low-income communities. And the reason why we think it's important to look at farmers markets is because we know, through our experience working with them, that relatively speaking, especially in comparison to grocery stores or supermarkets, they are relatively low risk and relatively low expense to set up and maintain. So they can be somewhat easily put together and developed and maintained in a community. However, we know that they are incredibly challenging. Many of you probably know this if you're doing this yourselves, to sustain and to keep going, essentially, and to make successful. And then there's a lot of perceptions out there around farmers markets that they are not really for the low-income community, or that the low-income community is not welcome. And so we wanted to really know whether this was true, whether this was a sort of perceived whether this was a true perception or inaccurate, or what were the things that were working or not working in terms of attracting that audience. Because we had the interaction with several markets across the country using the Kellogg and Ford program, we wanted to continue to work with several of those for this study. It just was better. We had a lot of baseline data on these markets already. We had good interactions with them. We knew them very well. And so we chose 8 markets to study. And the reasons why we chose those, we wanted to get a group that was across the country. We wanted to have somewhat of an urban and rural, none of these markets are terribly rural, but a sort of big city, small city, or town mix. And we wanted to have a variety of different types of markets, established, relatively new, infrastructure, no infrastructure, et cetera. So just quickly going through the 8 markets that we looked at. The first is in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's the Fondy Farmers Market, established in 1970. It's located in an underserved neighborhood in Milwaukee. It's actually in a shed, what we call a shed market, which has a roof and the ability to have somewhat a sense of permanence, a permanent sign. However, it is still somewhat exposed to the elements. This market has approximately 30 vendors at peak season, many of which are Hmong refugees. The second is the Mount Vernon Farmers Market, which is located just north of Seattle. This is a market founded in 1987, probably pretty familiar to a lot of people across the country. 60-plus vendors, open air, was predominantly focused on a moderate income consumer, but in the last 10 or so years, the community has experienced large growth of Hispanic farm workers into the area, and they initially approached us through the Kellogg program to figure out programming and ways to reach out to that community. So we wanted to include them in this report. In the Northeast, we were working with the Lynn Farmers Market, based out of Lynn, Massachusetts, which is just north, an declining industrial city north of Boston. This market is actually, it's relatively small. It's about 5 vendors. One of the vendors is actually also the operator of the market. It's the Food Project, North Shore. This is the sort of sister organization of the Food Project, which is based in Boston. It's a youth-oriented farming and market program. This market, incidentally, out of the 8, had the highest percentage of SNAP and WIC usage at its market. And there's been already some talk about incentive programs. I'd like to go on record to say that this is one of the very first, as far as we know, one of the very first incentive program markets in the country. And it was interesting to hear that many of the incentive programs are not actually coming from national foundations, et cetera, but from local groups. This market actually did that themselves with a local food pantry. They received a $500 grant from a food pantry in nearby, and they were able to give out extra produce from their own, the Food Project's own produce stand. For every $2 in SNAP redemption at the market, they got the customer got $2 in produce, and that was, again, like I said, a local funder that was helping to support that program. The next market is the Toledo Farmers Market. This is in Toledo, Ohio. It is one of the markets in the country that vies for the oldest continuously operated market in the U.S. We don't know exactly which one is really the oldest, but they say that they have been in operation for 175 years. They have about 45 vendors. They, like Fondy, are located under a shed with the covering overhead and exposure on the sides. However, in recent years, they have been able to put sort of garage doors on parts of their sheds so that they can have more of a year-round presence and be comfortable. This market we were particularly interested in because it is located in a city that is facing a number of challenges, including unemployment. And this market is right in the heart of the inner city. However, it is maintained, probably because it's been around for so long, a very strong customer base that drives in from the suburbs. So they have a very mixed customer population. The East New York Farmers Market in Brooklyn, New York. East New York is a very challenged community in terms of high level of crime and poverty and unemployment. However, this market came out of a really positive community engagement process with a local university where they determined that with their high level of elderly and youth and community gardens, they could really put together an interesting program using the community gardeners as the sort of base anchor tenants of their market. The market was founded in 1998. It now, on peak season day, probably has about 20 vendors, majority of which are still local community gardeners, but they are now nicely anchored by a few upstate New York farmers and a fisherman from Queens. So the product mix is quite varied. Just a kind of cute anecdote about them, their most popular item to sell are collard greens, and they have a rule where community gardeners are the first allowed to sell collard greens, and the farmers from upstate are not allowed to take them off their truck until the community gardeners have sold out for the day. Just an anecdote to sort of highlight the importance that community has in this market, and that the importance of those gardeners to sustaining this market. City Seed in New Haven, Connecticut is actually a network of markets, 4 markets. New Haven is a relatively impoverished city, yet Yale University kind of throws off some of their data and also represents a lot of the customer base for this market, and this market's shoppers tend to be relatively affluent and predominantly Caucasian. And because of that and their sort of sensitivity to the city that they're located in, they've done a lot of work to try to attract a more diverse customer base. Allen Street in Lansing, Michigan is a relatively small farmers market. It was started in 2005, so when we started working with them, it was a relatively new market. And it is in a diverse neighborhood, and right from the get-go was trying to attract as many people as they could from all over the place, and they were, started immediately with a lot of programming to do so. And then finally, the 8th market was the Midtown Farmers Market in Minneapolis. 2003, this market was founded. It is already over 80+ vendors. It is located in a diverse neighborhood in Minneapolis. Again, right off the bat was trying to attract as many different folks to this market as possible, and interestingly was the first farmers market in Minnesota to accept SNAP at their market. So just quickly, the methodology. The work we did with Robert Johnson and partnered with Columbia, we actually had three tasks that we went through, and I'm actually only going to be talking about one of the results today. It's most relevant to the topic at hand. But the first methodology that we undertook was surveys, not just of customers shopping at these 8 markets, but also of non-customers. And the way we did that was we would locate a grocery store, strip mall, or shopping area very close to the farmers market on market day and stand in the parking lot, or if the grocery store would let us inside, to stop people, do street intercept surveys, and survey them on their shopping habits and why they did or did not shop at the farmers market. So just an important for later that these surveys were done on market day, located very close to their markets. The second thing we did was an analysis of the market management data. This is things like the market's revenue and expenses and number of vendors over the years. And as I said, because we'd worked with these markets for years through other programs, we had baseline data from them, and we also had several years of data. And with this, we just asked them to keep collecting that information so we could look at it and see how successful they were in terms of becoming more self-sustaining, et cetera. And then finally, the focus groups. The 2 of these markets, the Lynn Farmers Market and the East New York Farmers Market, have incredibly established youth-oriented farmers market programming, internships for their youth in their communities, and we did 2 all-day focus groups, one with each, to just determine whether this kind of programming had a strong impact on their eating habits and their families' eating habits. And as I mentioned, for the purpose of today, we're going to be focusing on the results of the surveys of customers and non-customers. And as far as we know, this kind of surveying at this level, we completed 873 surveys total. Of non-customers, I don't have exact numbers of the non-customers out of that 873, but as far as we know, that's sort of the first time that on that scale somebody has looked at non-customers and their experience with farmers markets or non-experience with farmers markets. So on to the results. To begin with, the market shoppers, the top 4 reasons we were given as to why they do shop at the market, very happily to us. The one was good prices. As you can see, 60% believed that their farmer's market was offered better prices than the local grocery store. The second was high quality of the products and the produce, which is not something we were terribly surprised by. That's pretty consistent across most market surveys, that customers are really satisfied and happy with the quality. Convenience, which is always nice to see. Markets often struggle with how convenient they can be for their customer base. And the increased level of socialization. For many of these markets, they're located actually right in the heart of their community, which might be why the convenience level was higher than we kind of expected it to be. And also, for some of these communities, as an example, East New York, there aren't a lot of sort of perceived safe public spaces for people to gather in, and these markets provide that, even if it's only for a few hours of the week. Moving to the top results for non-shoppers of why they don't shop at the market, not surprisingly, inconvenience was one of the #1 reasons. So for this group, the sort of reasoning they gave behind that was that they were going to have to shop, if they shopped at a market for produce, say, they were still going to have to go to a grocery store for dry goods or for toilet paper and things like that. And so just the fact that they would have to hit more than one store was an inconvenience for them. But probably more interesting to us was that there was a great unawareness of that the market existed, where the market was, when it was, what day it was located, what time it was open. 48% of the non-shoppers said they did not know the location of their local market. 53% said they did not know what day and time the market was operating. And again, as I mentioned earlier, these surveys were completed incredibly close to the market, those 8 markets, and on market day. And in fact, one of the survey locations, I believe it was the Milwaukee Fondy Farmers Market location, the grocery store is literally across the street, and people still said they didn't know the market was there, and they didn't know when it was, and it was happening at that moment across the street from where they were. So there's definitely some challenges with just getting the word out. So the good news that we found was that market shoppers say that they consume a higher number of fruits and vegetables. It's really hard to know whether that is true or not. And in fact, we had a little bit more of this type of research in our original proposal to Robert Johnson when it came to the youth-oriented programming, and Robert Johnson struck it from our proposal and said, you know, you're not going to get really good answers from people. Anecdotally, they're going to kind of tell you what you want to hear. But nonetheless, it's always good to see that people are saying, at least in their perceptions, that they are eating more fruits and vegetables because they're shopping at farmers markets. The other good news, which I found actually most interesting, was that out of this work, we discovered that it is true that low-income shoppers are less likely than moderate to high-income shoppers to use farmers markets. However, what we discovered is that low-income shoppers are more likely to use their markets more intensively than any other economic group. And what I mean by that is that more low-income shoppers who do shop at markets are more likely to buy more than half of their total consumed produce at a farmer's market when they shop. So we termed this group as intense shoppers. And I find this to be particularly interesting. I don't know. I've been working in farmers markets for over 10 years, and we don't have a lot of money at our in our hands to do some really great market research. We're not Target, we're not Walmart. Those big guys know exactly who their customers are. They know exactly who their best customers are, and I would bet that they probably spend the most money targeting those customers to get more of them. Farmers markets don't have that luxury, haven't had that luxury, and often spend a lot of time sort of throwing as many ideas and programs at the wall as possible to just see what sticks. And so one thing that we kind of took away from this is that there is an intense shopper. There could be maybe demographically a few different types of intense shoppers at each market, and it's important to think about how markets can find out who they are and to do a better job making them happy and then attracting more of them. The other good news item that we found is that, and this is really good news, was that even among non-shoppers, the price of goods was not identified as a significant barrier for shopping at the market. Only 17% of non-shoppers said that price was a reason they did not shop at farmers markets. So this perception that markets are expensive, this perception that low-income communities wouldn't shop there, don't want to shop there because they're too expensive, is, at least in our data, has not borne out to be true. The not-so-good news. So all 8 of these markets accepted SNAP at the time of the survey. I believe they still do. They had for at least a year. All of them also accepted WIC FMMP coupons, the Farmers Market Nutrition Program coupons. So just as a background for that. However, what we discovered among low-income market shoppers who received either SNAP or WIC, were on WIC and could get FMMP coupons, was that they were not using them at the market, which we found particularly interesting, and we don't know why, and the survey wasn't set up in such a way to find out why. Using the market management data I mentioned earlier, we split our group of 8 markets into 2 categories for each. One was the group of markets that were self-sustaining on vendor fees. Of that particular group, shopper survey respondents, were 33% of which had received SNAP at some point. Of that group of people who received SNAP, only 9% had used it at the market ever. And then in the other group of markets that were what we called mission-driven markets, markets that relied pretty heavily on outside funding and grants to support themselves, 73% of their market shoppers were on SNAP, had received SNAP, and only 27% of them had ever used it at the market. And again, as I said, these are all markets that had SNAP programs for at least a year and FMMP programs. Among our non-shoppers, as you can see, 26% said that the reason they didn't shop at the farmer's market is because it didn't accept, in their terms, food stamps, SNAP, and almost 19% said it was because they didn't take WIC coupons. So there is definitely something in terms of the marketing or the outreach or something going on where even among SNAP recipients who shop at markets and are, I guess, using cash, are not using their federal assistance at the market. And again, this information is a couple years old, so it might have changed. It might be better now. But just to see, that's what we've discovered.
And Kelly, this is Patrick. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yep.
Time's just about up.
Okay.
Time's just about up, so.
Okay, wrapping up. On to conclusions. So really just to the takeaways from this were, as I mentioned with the intense shoppers, it's really important to know who your best shoppers are and to find out what they want and market to them. As part of that, partnerships are incredibly important, so finding out who those intense shoppers are and then what are the organizations that interact with them the most and to work with them to try to get the word out about your market. You see, 48% of our shoppers knew about the market through word of mouth. Location, to deal with that convenience factor, people want to be able to do as many things as possible in one errand, so locating your market in the right location is key. The marketing, it's really hard to get over that people don't know where the market is and when it is, and especially for these ephemeral markets that don't have permanent structures, this can be a challenge, but just being really cognizant of that. And finally, just recommendations is the surveying is always important. A lot of people survey their shoppers, but if you can find some funding to survey non-shoppers, that would be really probably very interesting. Targeting your really best customers to see if they can get the word out for you. Again, the word of mouth is the most important thing you can do among your customers. Incentive programs have been mentioned. These do seem to help increase SNAP usage among your shoppers. And again, the importance of partnering, especially with anybody who might have affiliations with SNAP recipients. So just to let you know, you can read the survey over here on the right. I think it's the right on your page under the notes section. There's a link that you can copy and paste to download the entire PDF of the report. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Our final speaker today is Kate Cole. Kate?
Great. Hi, thank you so much. So I'll try to go quickly since we're a little short on time. Just as background, most of my knowledge about WIC and farmers markets comes from working on a CDC Communities Putting Prevention to Work project in King County, Washington. And we were working on increasing the number of vendors accepting SNAP as well as WIC cash value vouchers. I'll get into more about those in a second. I'm not going to go into the details of the study or the methodology, but our study findings are published and there's a citation at the end. So just a little WIC 101 to start off with. As we've heard, it's a special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. And the goal is to provide supplemental foods plus nutrition education and health screenings to low-income clients. To be eligible, clients need to be pregnant, breastfeeding, or postpartum women, or be infants and children under 5. And they must have an income of 100% to 185% below the federal poverty level, and it depends on the state for the exact eligibility. Unlike SNAP, WIC is delivered via paper vouchers, and the vouchers are for specific nutritious foods. However, it will be switching over to the EBT system like SNAP, and I'll touch on that a little bit at the end. The foods and amounts vary by age of the recipient, and unlike SNAP, where it's just sort of delivered automatically monthly to the client, WIC vouchers are picked up in bi-monthly appointments at WIC centers, and they meet with nutritionists. So not all of the WIC package can be used at farmers markets. There's only 2 types of vouchers that are approved for use at farmers markets. So, for example, even though WIC can be used for milk and eggs, a client can't use their milk or egg voucher to buy those products at a farmer's market. And I'll go into each of these checks individually. The first one is the WIC Farmers Market Nutrition Program, or FMNP. These are $1 to $5 vouchers that can be used for fresh produce, and the value depends on the state. They're redeemable only at WIC-authorized farmers market vendors, meaning they can't be used at grocery stores. And they're not part of the regular WIC package, so they're distributed only to clients who want the vouchers. Not all states participate in this program, and they have to provide matching funds to the federal funds. So right now, 46 states and U.S. territories participate. And as far as participation and redemption rates go, in 2012, 1.7 million WIC clients received these benefits. That's out of a total of almost 9 million WIC clients that year. About 25,000 farmers, markets, and stands were authorized to accept FMNP, and it generated a little over $14 million in revenue for farmers. So FMNP, up until very recently, was the only WIC voucher that could be used at farmers markets, and they're still the most common and familiar WIC voucher at farmers markets. So if you're talking to a vendor or a WIC client and they're talking about WIC, they're probably referring to FMNP. The new kid on the block are the cash value vouchers, or CVVs, also called fruit and vegetable checks. Unlike the FMNP coupons, they're part of the regular WIC nutrition package, and they're good only for the purchase of fruits and vegetables, but they can be used at a regular grocery store, and that's sort of primarily where they're intended to be used. However, states have the option of allowing the CVVs to also be used at farmers markets. Because CVVs were only introduced as part of the WIC package in 2008, they're still pretty new. Only 19 states as of 2012 have approved them for use at farmers markets. I wasn't able to find national data on CVV redemption at markets, but based on data from California and from our pilot project in Washington State, we know that about less than 1% of total CVV redemption happens at markets. And while that's low, it's also to be expected considering how new they are to this environment. So the vendor participation process for both FMNP and CVV is relatively similar, although it varies slightly by state. And my understanding is that, at least in Washington State, and I think this is true in most states, it's not a single application to become a WIC-approved vendor. Instead, they have to apply separately to be CVV approved versus FMNP approved. Basic process, fill out an application, go to a class, you get a sign that you display at your booth. To accept the vouchers to do the transaction. For FMNP checks, the farmer simply accepts it like cash. For CVVs, they need to check ID and get a signature with each transaction. And then they redeem the vouchers with either their market manager or with their bank, depending on how that market is set up. So our evaluation for our Communities Putting Prevention to Work pilot found that vendors reacted very positively to WIC. And one of the most interesting findings, and this has been backed up in other surveys we've done in Washington, is that they didn't just value WIC at farmers markets as a source of income, but as another method to help low-income shoppers shop at their market. So we asked in our study participating vendors to list the top 2 reasons that they participated in WIC. And the number 1 reason they said was to make it easier for low-income shoppers to buy my food. So WIC, because it's handed out at the WIC clinics bi-monthly, the number 1 way that it's promoted to clients that it can be used at farmers markets is through these regular appointments with nutritionists, which is a wonderful opportunity for outreach. In addition, WIC clinics are encouraged to distribute the FMNP coupons at farmers markets so that the coupons get to those sort of intense shoppers like Kelly talked about, the people who are more likely to use them. And finally, all of the vendors who participate are encouraged to hang signs at their booths so that people know that they can use WIC there. In addition, much less commonly, market managers or WIC staff may hold classes or outreach at farmers markets to promote the use of WIC at farmers markets, or do outreach within community areas where they know WIC clients will be. But because most market managers are not full-time and not paid, this isn't part of their regular job duties, and so there's not a lot of support for them to be doing this type of work. So I was also asked to touch on methods to increase redemption at farmers markets, and there are a few interventions that have been shown to increase FMNP participation by clients. The first one is doing nutrition education. So like I talked about, classes at farmers markets, or also, cooking classes at WIC clinics that mention and connect to farmers markets. In addition, just like we talked about with SNAP, occasionally markets on their own will sponsor incentive and matching programs with WIC, and those have been shown to increase participation. But and this sort of segues on what Kelly was talking about. Markets are all very different and communities are all very different, and so there's unlikely to be sort of a magic bullet that's going to increase WIC redemption at markets. Instead, what we found in our own experience in Washington State and what's been backed up in some other research is that it's really important to do relationship building and partnerships and coordination in order to get all of the various parts and pieces and folks who are working within a community with low-income shoppers to be working together to promote use of WIC and SNAP at farmers markets. So New York State had success by hiring an FMNP coordinator for the state to streamline outreach and promotion, increase collaboration among state agencies, and do local capacity building. On our end, in our CPPW project, we found with our WIC staff and market staff that while they told us in surveys that they were definitely talking to clients about using WIC at farmers markets, when we got more into the qualitative research, they really expressed that they didn't feel very familiar with the markets and therefore felt like they could do a better job of promoting them if they had more of a relationship and a partnership with the markets and knew better how they worked. So I just want to, before I finish out, because I know we're short on time, I want to note a big change that's coming to WIC that we already witnessed with SNAP in the 90s. Right now, most WIC is distributed through paper vouchers. However, by 2020, WIC nationally needs to transition to EBT, or electronic benefit transfer cards. They're similar to debit cards. When SNAP switched from paper vouchers to the EBT system, we saw a dramatic decrease in SNAP spending at farmers markets because so few vendors were set up with the technology they needed to accept EBT. And while many more vendors now have that technology, it needs to be taken into consideration what's going to happen to those vendors who have been relying on WIC vouchers who don't have this technology. And so I think this is both an area for growth, but also an area that needs a lot of attention. And for those of you who are researchers, is an interesting opportunity for sort of natural experiments in this area. So I will close out there since I know we want to have a few more minutes for questions.
Great. Thanks, Kate. Let's move through your citations. So I know we ran a little short on time for Q&A, but we'll try to address some questions now. And just again, as a reminder, if you submitted a question, we have it tracked, and we will, if we don't get to it right now, the question with the answer from the speakers will be posted to the SSRC website relatively shortly. So don't despair. So for I'll go speaker by speaker here from the questions that are already posted. So for Rogelio, the question is, there are around 2,500 authorized farmers markets. You mentioned there are also around 1,700 individualized vendors who are authorized. Is there any overlap between these two figures?
Yes, there is. I think a couple of the speakers have made reference to the fact that we have some situations where a market might be authorized and a vendor isn't, and all the vendors are not. You might have some situations where you have a vendor or multiple vendors at a market that is not itself SNAP authorized. And at the same time, depending on the rules of a farmer's market, you might have a situation where the market is authorized, and at the same time you have individual vendors who are themselves authorized. So absolutely there is some overlap. That's why it's a little bit difficult to say exactly how many markets around the country have SNAP available, because there is overlap there.
Great, thanks. For Sujata, a couple of quick questions. One's kind of I think a yes-no question, but the first question is, why are FNS licenses tied to a specific street address and location? And if a market operates in more than one location, it has to obtain multiple licenses. Even the same organization is sponsoring the market enterprise as a brand. So I think the question again is, why are FNS licenses tied to a specific street address and location?
I'm going to actually defer that to Rogelio.
I think that's the way to go. Thank you very much, Sujata. Actually, the reason for that, ultimately it comes down to program integrity. As the folks who pay attention to these programs know, we're constantly under a magnifying glass, and we're trying to make sure that the program is used only in the way that it's supposed to by the people it's supposed to. And if we were to allow a piece of equipment or a license to be used at multiple locations, it would open the door to different types of fraud, trafficking. If you're at market A and I have your license number, when I'm operating at market B and I do some fraudulent transactions, I type in the number for market A and I get that person in trouble, or potentially get them in trouble. It just opens up a Pandora's box of problems. It's basically the same reason that we don't allow any other type of retailer to share equipment. It's one location, one piece of equipment, one FNS.
Great, thanks. This question is definitely for Sujata. Is your measurement tool available?
Yes, the survey instrument is actually a part of the Volume 2, which is also on the FNS website.
Great. For Kelly, a couple of questions.
Sure.
First question, has there been any work on getting SNAP used for kind of quote-unquote prepared healthy foods, prepared meaning takeout, in inner-city neighborhoods?
Again, I might actually defer that to our friend Rogelio at the USDA, but I'm aware, personally, this is something that we've actually tried to figure out how we could kind of make happen with some of the markets we've worked with in a way that would make FNS happy. I believe that there are some cities that actually do allow some prepared food buying through via SNAP for the disabled and the elderly, but I do not think that it is limited to healthy foods or perceived healthy foods. But again, I'm not an expert on sort of the FNS rules of what SNAP can be used for, and I know it does, as I said, vary from, I believe, state to state in some instances.
And I will jump in there and say that the reason for that, generally speaking, is that FNS regulations, SNAP regulations, prohibit the use of SNAP benefits to purchase hot foods or prepared foods that are intended to be consumed on site. So that's not something that we permit. That said, there are programs that allow that on a limited basis, as was just mentioned, for disabled folks, people on Social Security, blind folks, and I think the homeless and the elderly. They're very specific populations, but that isn't in a farmer's market context. That's in what we would call a communal dining facility. Now, those may be adjacent to or near a farmer's market or have some kind of association with the group that manages a farmer's market, but that would be a different operation than the market itself. But the short answer is that it's as a general rule, it's not allowed.
Makes sense. Great. For Kelly, has the public perception, admitted or otherwise detected, been found that produce sold at a farmer's market is not as clean or trustworthy?
I guess I would depend on what your definition of clean or trustworthy is. We didn't get into that with this particular survey. As I mentioned in the presentation, the market shoppers were certainly incredibly satisfied with the quality. And anecdotally, in our work with markets over the years, many instances, the products that are sold, the produce that's sold at farmers markets or public markets, is perceived by the public to be more trustworthy than what they might receive, buy in a grocery store or supermarket, primarily because of that direct-to-producer interaction that often takes place, and that ability to ask questions of how is this produced, how is this grown, how is this harvested, how is this brought to market. That direct ability makes a big difference to the perception. So while we're sort of aware that different customer populations have sort of different ideas of how product is perceived to be sort of clean or safe, or and that varies actually quite a bit. It's not something that we've actually encountered very much in farmers markets. No.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
For Kate, a couple of questions. First being, let's see, does the 14.3 million in WIC FM NP sales, does that exclude senior FM NP sales?
Yes, it does. The data I was providing is only for the WIC portion.
Okay, great. Another question. Does the technology for SNAP and WIC EBT acceptance, is that the same? Can people use the same machines for both different benefits programs?
My understanding is that you can. One of the catches is that for CVV, right now they're required to have essentially a barcode number, and that's obviously very difficult in a farmer's market setting. And I believe a few communities that have piloted and are already sort of troubleshooting and working through this have come up with workarounds on that, but I think that will be a challenge as this gets spread out nationwide.
And if I could add on to that, I can tell you that the equipment that we're providing, the SNAP equipment, accepts currently credit card and debit cards as well as SNAP, and when WIC EBT becomes active, the equipment will be capable of taking that on. We're building that into the equipment that we're providing. So when it's ready, we'll be ready.
Right. And I believe this question's for Kate. Are the shopper and non-shopper questions available? And if that's not for Kate, somebody let me know.
I think that's for Kelly.
Okay, it's probably for Kelly, right?
So the survey, we don't have anything available to the public. It is something that would be nice to share so that people could use that tool themselves. To be perfectly blunt, it wasn't a perfect survey, and it required we used grad students who were actually really good at surveying to do it because there was a lot of skip logic involved in it. So I don't, that's something that as we're redoing our website, and I might be able to put up a simplified version along with the report, but the actual surveys themselves, part of what took us so long to go through the data was the fact that there was a lot, it created a lot of confusion, and kind of, it's not your simple sort of dot survey that farmers markets are used to doing.
Hey, Patrick, I wanted to just jump in here. The farmers market study that I was presenting also had a second component to it, which was a survey of clients who shop and don't shop at farmers markets. And once that report will be published in the next month or so, the survey instruments for shoppers and non-shoppers will be available through SNS.
Great, thanks. And with that, Travis, I think we're out of time.
That concludes today's presentation. Thank you for your participation.